Hi, my name's Mitchell and I'm a Year 12 student. I have studied Japanese since Year 8, although at the time I didn't realise how useful it would be. I thought that as an Australian, all I needed was English. I didn't have to learn another language, as everyone speaks English, even overseas. But did you know that only 7% of the world's population are native English speakers? So, if you only speak English, you are in fact in the minority. Although the national language of Australia is English, English is definitely not the only language spoken here. The 2001 census noted that there are over 160 ancestries of Australian citizens. We are a multicultural society. Geographically, we are linked to Asia, and we are operating in an increasingly globalised community. Advancements in technology and communication mean it is relatively easy to visit distant countries, conduct multinational business, or simply email friends around the world. More and more, an empathy for the culture of other countries and an understanding of other languages is the key to success. There are numerous businesses that rely on these cultural and linguistic skills to operate every day. Tourism, banking, education, and the government are just a few areas to begin with. Today we will meet with 6 individuals for whom knowledge of language and culture has greatly changed their lives. How will languages change your life? An obvious career for speakers of foreign language is tourism. There are numerous careers that benefit from multilingual employees, including hotel employees, tour operators, and salespeople. Today we are going to visit French Travel Connection and meet Delphine Mignon, a senior travel consultant.
French Travel Connection is Australia's largest tour operator for travel to France in Australia. Our focus is to tailor-make holidays for our clients, and we try and make those travel arrangements unique for them. Our company is different from the others in the sense that most of our consultants are originally from France, and they have a special knowledge of the culture and the place itself, which is a great asset for our clients. We deal with tour operators and hoteliers on a daily basis in our work, and we need to be able to speak to them in their own language because it can allow us to gain that extra information and to build a rapport with them. And our clients appreciate that. They're aware that we can do this, and a lot of the time, this particular element will mean that their holiday will be special. I think the French are quite proud of their culture, and they do like if people make the effort of speaking their language, even if it's just a few words. If you just say, "Hello, do you speak English?" or something like that, if at least you try, they appreciate that greatly, and sometimes it can make a world of difference on how people approach you. So when we speak to our suppliers, they like that we can speak French when they can't speak so good English. And for travelers, it's somebody will show you the right market or the right place to be. I think learning a foreign language and learning about a foreign culture not only offers opportunities and relationships with a foreign country, but it's also critical to really getting to know the different cultures. Australia is a very isolated and remote country, yet it's multicultural. I think in today's world, because there's so much communication going around, you have to be able to welcome and to adapt to any culture and society. I speak French and English. I have learned German in school and Italian, and I did pick up a bit of Spanish when I was traveling in South America. I think languages give you an incredible insight in the places you visit. It allows you to know more, to feel more welcome, and for me it's a great pleasure to be between 2 different cultures. I feel very, very special in my personal development. So I think for high school students, when they consider learning a different language, that's one of the things they should take into account. It will give them opportunities. It will make them stand out from the crowd.
A less obvious career in languages is the entertainment industry. SBS Radio broadcasts nationally in 170 languages, and its television station offers programs subtitled in 120 languages. Translating corporate training and information videos is also an expanding industry that requires linguists for voiceover work. Today we spoke with Olya Bulya, the station manager for SBS Radio Sydney.
I work for SBS Radio, and SBS Radio broadcasts in 68 languages. So we have programs on the hour every hour, and the 68 languages include English as well. So I'm a station manager here, so all the language groups report to me through the program managers. The function of SBS basically is to provide a multilingual and multicultural radio and television service that can entertain, educate and inform Australians in the language that they prefer. Well, I speak Ukrainian. That's my first language. I speak Russian because that was my second language that I learned, and my third language was English. However, English is probably now my strongest language, simply because I work in it 24 hours a day. And, I mean, we live in Asia, and wouldn't it be wonderful if as many people as live here could speak another language, like they do in Europe? I mean, in Europe, second, third language is not a must. It's people don't even blink when you say you speak three languages, and it's they do everything, including commerce, business, everything's in different languages. We have a Norwegian head of group who worked in Liechtenstein, and she said that she had to have the knowledge of 4 languages to work in McDonald's because of everybody traveling through that area. So she had to know. She spoke Norwegian. She had to speak English, French, and German. When I talk to people from Spanish background or Italian background, they virtually sit on your lap when they talk to you, and there's lots of hands flying around. I just can't do that with people from an Asian culture, for example. You have to be very respectful of space. You have to. I had this very strange thing happen to me early on when I became a program manager first. And I was talking to one of the Vietnamese head of group at the time, and she was looking down all the time, and I was talking to her, and I kept wanting to look at her eyes, and she kept looking down, and I kept doing this sort of thing, and then the closer I got, the further she moved away. So we ended up following each other around the room until I realized that she really just needs to respect the distance. So that one was learned a little bit hard by example, but there are things like that. And our Chinese heads of group, for example, they won't say no directly. If you say, can you do this, they'll say, for example, I would prefer to do that. And if you keep pressing for a yes or no answer, they will keep trying to avoid it, not because they're trying to be, rude to you, but because in their culture you don't really say no to authority like that. So there are little subtleties that you pick up along the way, but are very important subtleties to know, not to be completely embarrassed in your dealings with another culture. If you don't have the language, you can't get into the house, as it were. You can look through the window and perceive what's going on, but when you have that language knowledge and you can speak to people in their own language, it really opens up a world to you that you would not otherwise have. You can travel overseas, you can work overseas, you can do all sorts of things with the knowledge of the language and the culture that goes along with it. In terms of the electives, I think it's a difficult choice. I mean, my own children who spoke Ukrainian when they went to school, and only Ukrainian, now speak English with some Ukrainian, and one of them takes French and the other one takes Mandarin and Japanese at school. And it's a very interesting phenomenon, because the more languages you have, the easier it gets for you to actually study the next one. So I would encourage people not to lose their own language if they have a background, because that's a window to understand their own culture and the culture of the parents or the grandparents, and it's very important to understand that, but to open yourself up to the possibilities of something completely different.
There are numerous positions for language speakers in international relations and community services. International relations focuses on developing relations between individual countries and ethnic groups. Community services support and assist people to assimilate into Australian society whilst maintaining their cultural sense of identity. Today we met with Katie McMahon, who is a program coordinator at the Japan Cultural Centre.
The Japan Foundation is a semi-government non-profit organisation, and our function is twofold. We promote and support Japanese culture and the arts, Japanese studies and Japanese language overseas, and we also facilitate cultural exchange and collaboration with Japan and other countries, Japanese specialists and other specialists in other countries. I speak Japanese and Korean, and I started studying Japanese in high school, and I did 3-unit Japanese for the HSC. I then studied, I did a Japanese studies major and a Korean studies major at UNSW. I think the study of languages and understanding other people's culture is important on so many levels. Because we're a multicultural society, we really need to understand and be sensitive to other cultures, and the best way to do this is through your own experience. So once you've been living overseas, you understand the challenges that people face when you are in another environment. Also, we're increasingly becoming more global, a global world, and I mean, in the case of Japan and Korea, a lot of the people don't speak English fluently or quite well, so to be able to speak their language is a very important step in becoming more connected as a you know, in a worldwide sense. I mean, one thing that I found when I was overseas as well, living overseas, is that you actually learn to appreciate your own culture more, because you step out of that and then you can look back at, you know, you're more objective about your own culture. You learn a lot more about your own culture as well and your own heritage. It also broadens your horizons, and you learn that not everything that, you know, you take for granted and the way that you think, you know, things are done in society, it's not necessarily the same from the viewpoint of people in other cultures, that things, customs and things like that aren't necessarily universal, and perspectives on things aren't universal.
As Australia has a relatively small population, its domestic market is also limited. As such, trade with other countries is important to Australian business. The appropriate marketing of our products is dependent on an understanding of the target country's culture. Austrade is an organisation that helps Australian companies succeed in the international market. We spoke with Alan Morrell, Senior Trade Commissioner to the Philippines, and Peter Ironmonger, Trade Commissioner to Shanghai, China.
Austrade is the Australian Federal Government's export agency. What that means is we help Australian companies internationalise their business. That can take a variety of forms. It's either some direct export where you send your product to another country, or it might be that you establish an office overseas or do some form of collaboration with a company outside of Australia. All of those forms of business is what Austrade is meant to help Australian companies achieve and be successful in doing that business. My particular role is to manage one of the offices of Austrade, and in my case that's in Manila, the Philippines. So I do a number of things in that role, but the core part of the position is to manage a team of 12 other people, to also liaise with the embassy, the Australian embassy, and the people, the various elements within that, also the government of the Philippines, but more importantly with the private sector, the companies that are in Manila, and try and encourage them to look at doing business with Australian companies. So put all that together, it's a management and marketing role. We've got a network of 100 plus offices around the world. Every one of those offices is involved in creating linkages between Australian companies and their Australian culture and the culture of the country in which they're operating. So it's a fundamental part of what we're trying to do. And in fact, the reason that we have that network is to try and make the bridge, or bridge the gap if you like, between how business is done in Australia and how it might be done in those other countries.
Australia is a multicultural society, and we don't live within our own culture, whether it be an English-speaking culture or maybe from Italy or a Chinese-based culture. We don't live in isolation. We have to get on with other people, and I think it's good for the whole country if we can understand that. But from the trade and business point of view, Australia is quite a small country, and we need to export and also import. We need to trade with other countries, and if you don't have the cultural understanding, you can't achieve such a good success with your partners overseas.
I've spent more than half of my career outside of Australia, so there are lots and lots of instances that where I can think where that cultural understanding and language is most critical. Traditionally in Australia we've held, or many people have held a view that that English is the dominant language and that's all you really need to get by and get ahead in most places. What I've seen in my work with Austrade over 9 years is that North East Asia is becoming increasingly important to Australia. The linkages that we have aren't just built around trade and dollars, it's about people linkages and all sorts of things as well. Fundamental to that are the languages that people speak. And I find that only being able to speak one language increasingly in the world is really not good enough. Being able to speak two languages is actually the norm in most of the places where I've been around the world. And when I first went overseas, as a 20-year-old out there to see the world and discover everything about it, I found myself in Holland working in a job there and felt quite inadequate that I was the only person in the work environment in which I found myself that spoke one language. Everybody else in that entire company, and we were talking 100 people plus, spoke at least two languages. And that, for me, that was part of the motivation to get out there and learn a second language.
Another career for speakers of foreign language is education. You could teach at a primary school, high school, TAFE college or university. There are also specialists needed to teach at organisations such as private companies, the armed forces and community language schools. Today we will meet with Professor David Reeve at the University of New South Wales.
I think languages have been very good to me in my career. First of all, I studied French and together with English and history, and I got a job as a diplomat representing Australia in Indonesia. And I think it was the French that sort of tipped me over into getting the job. There were plenty of people with history and English, but I think that combination plus the French made me more attractive. But then, because I was going to work in the embassy in Jakarta, I learnt Indonesian as well. And so all my subsequent jobs, I've taught Indonesian at TAFE, I've taught Indonesian studies at universities in Indonesia, I've worked at 4 universities in Indonesia, and I've run a program there putting Australian students into Indonesian universities. All of those, the Indonesian helped me get the job. So I think I'd say, just in brief, French got me my first job, and Indonesian got me my later jobs. So I'm really someone who can say languages helped me in my career. I think that when you learn grammar, it allows you to say, hopefully, all possible sentences that you can say, but partly out of the points that I was mentioning before about different levels of politeness. Some of the sentences that you can theoretically say will cause offence in another society. That happens to Indonesians here too. Often they ask you what your religion is and what your pay is, which are two things that I think you don't ask a newcomer in Australia. Indonesians are always asking whether you're married, and if you're not, they ask why not and what's wrong. It's all sorts of things that would be thought of as an invasion of privacy in Australia. Indonesians are often always giving you advice because that's the way they show concern for each other, is to give lots of advice. But Australians tend to find that Indonesian tendency as if they're interfering in your own affairs. So when those Indonesians are speaking in English, grammatically their sentences are fine, but socially and culturally their sentences seem quite invasive to us. In Indonesia, people are always saying to me, "Gee, you're fat, aren't you?" And they mean it as a compliment. And they say, "Yes, you're very, very fat." I say, "Thank you." No, you're very fat. And they're being nice. They think it goes along with being wealthy and established. But I really wish they wouldn't keep saying these sorts of things. Of course, it goes the other way too. There are lots of Australian sentences which are fine grammatically, but which may seem rude and too direct and interfering in areas where you shouldn't. And so that's where I think the cultural understanding is most important, to know that Grammatically, you can say almost anything, but culturally, you've got to choose your weapons very carefully so that they make the maximum good effect and don't make a bad effect that you never intended. I've been very lucky, really, because I studied French and Indonesian. So I've got a European language and an Asian language. And I've been very glad about that. And one of the reasons I'm glad about it is that the way things operate in schools and high schools and TAFEs and even universities, policies often work to push the Asian and European languages into being opponents of each other. And you feel that everyone who studies Japanese is one taken away from French, and you get languages being pushed into an unfortunate rivalry. But I've always been one of the great believers that the more languages you offer, the more students hopefully you're going to get. So you asked what advice I'd have for students. Choose the language you like. So I don't mind whether students do French or Greek or Russian or Italian, or on the other hand, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, Chinese or Indonesian. But it'll enrich their lives immeasurably.
Today we met with 6 individuals whose interest in language and culture has led them down very different paths. You may choose to learn a language for travel, to understand your heritage, or to help assist you in your career. But whatever your reason, learning a language will change your perspective. As Olya Bulya of SBS pointed out, you can look through the window, but without the language, you will never be able to walk through the door. So what are you waiting for? How will languages change your life? The appropriate marketing of our products is dependent on an understanding of the target country's culture. Commissioner to the Shanghai, China.